Alienating allies, crashing markets and paralyzing businesses, plus destroying global confidence in America. This is the bleak assessment of US President Donald Trump's first 100 days in office. The 47th US president's trade and tariff war against China has domestic retailers warning of empty shelves and economists predicting a US recession before the end of the year. Internationally, China is seen as a more stable partner and force for good in the world than the United States. How have the Trump administration's first 100 days in office impacted bilateral ties? How will the trade fallout unfold in the short term? And how might the change in the comparative standing of the United States and China potentially shape the international landscape? Welcome to this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you live from Beijing. Joining me here in the studio, Einar Tangen, Senior Fellow at the Taihe Institute. From Jiangsu in eastern China, Dr. John Quelch, Executive Vice Chancellor and American President at Duke Kunshan University. From Beijing, Zhao Hai, Director of International Political Studies at China's National Institute for Global Strategy, and Surabh Gupta, Senior Policy Specialist at the Institute for China-America Studies, joining us from Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. So first of all, for those who may have not been following as closely as we have the steps in the past 100 days, here's a quick timeline, just a quick one. First, on Inauguration Day, which is January the 20th, President Trump signs an executive order delaying TikTok ban for 75 days. Then February the 1st, President Trump signs executive order slapping 10% tariff on all Chinese imports. On February the 1st, China responds by imposing 10 to 15% tariffs on some U.S. imports, including LNG and agricultural machinery. On March the 4th, Trump levies another 10% tariff on all Chinese imports. China responds with tariffs on selected U.S. products once again. Then on March the 26th, U.S. adds more than 50 Chinese tech companies to its export blacklist. On April the 2nd, on the so-called Liberation Day, President Trump launches tariffs war on nations in the world. China is hit with an additional 34%, bringing the total to 54%. Markets crashed around the world. On April the 4th, China matches the U.S. number with an additional 34% tariff on U.S. goods. China imposes export restrictions on some key rare earth elements that's vital to tech, medical, defense, and energy sectors. Then, on April the 7th, Trump threatens a further 50% tariff if China doesn't back down, and China didn't. On April the 9th, Trump raises tariffs on China to 104%, and China raises tariffs on all U.S. imports to 84%. On April the 10th, President Trump hikes tariffs on Chinese imports yet again to at least 145%, effective immediately, while announcing 90-day pause on tariffs for all other countries and regions. On April the 11th, China hits back by raising tariffs on U.S. imports to 125%, adding it will ignore further U.S. tariff hikes as it would make no economic sense. On April the 22nd, Trump claims the U.S. and China are, quote-unquote, actively in talks. And on April the 24th, Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs denies that any consultation or negotiation on tariffs are taking place. And on April the 25th, Trump tells Time magazine that the Chinese president has called. On April 28th, China denies any call has taken place between the two leaders. On April the 29th, that's 100 days of Trump's second term in office, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs releases a short video called Never Kneel Down. Einar, let me go to you. Which word would you use to summarize the first 100 days?
Disaster. Trump has done very well on the kind of social promises he made, which are very divisive in terms of saying that, you man and woman, he's against birthright citizenship. He's going to deport lots of people. All of these things, yes, they go to his base. But everything that his base wanted in terms of economics, he gets an absolute F for. I mean, prices are rising in the United States. You captured it all.
What about when it comes to China? Because we are focusing on bilateral ties, especially trade and economic ties.
Well, China has been resolute. They have been very, very clear. Donald Trump has been playing poker. He's trying to convince the world that he has a royal flush. And quite frankly, because trade is transparent, everybody knows what everyone else has and what they're selling and what they're buying. The world knows that he doesn't have it. But he's been doubling down on the theory that he could somehow convince people that he does or frighten them into doing so. And this has backfired. He's blinked. And now the question is, how do you manage a back down with the United States? And China is actively doing it. They put out that 6-point white paper a couple of weeks ago, making it very clear that the future is probably a phase 2. And more recently, they signaled good faith by dropping tariffs on some technological goods that are coming into China. This is a signal to Washington to do the same so that they can de-escalate the situation. This is not China giving in. It is simply China being cognizant that being the adult in the room means you have to manage an unruly 11-year-old.
Dr. Quelch, now President Trump has most recently indicated a potential U-turn, saying 145% is too high and it won't be that high. It won't be anywhere near that high. It comes down. It will come down substantially. Has this tit for tat or escalation been driven by logic, or has it been a thoughtless, knee-jerk emotional response to you?
So I think the escalation quite predictable. In the first Trump term, tariffs were attempted. They did not have as much impact as had been hoped by Trump and his advisors. They did not learn from the first administration that tariff policy does not work. What they learned was that they did not inflict enough pain, and therefore in Trump 2.0, you find this rapid escalation to try to inflict so much pain on the basis that the U.S. imports from China 5 times as much as it exports, and therefore it can out-tariff China. But this approach, of course, fails to understand the resilience and determination of China not to buckle to this kind of behavior. And I think what the administration in Washington is now hoping for is that they will be able to cut deals with Korea, with Japan, with India. They had, I think, 34 delegations last week visiting Washington on bended knee to try and get relief from the tariffs imposed by President Trump. The tactic here is to try to end up isolating China as the last man standing in terms of the country that is not bending the knee.
Well, we do not know, actually. I mean, I do not know, looking at all the media reports, exactly how many delegations are visiting Washington, how many deals are being cut, because there are so many fluctuating or conflicting reports. But let me go to Mr. Zhao Hai and get the perspective from China. Did the trade war come as a surprise to China at all? How would China characterize the 100-day of Trump at the beginning of his second term?
Well, from China's perspective, for the first question is that at this point, Trump is actually being very destructive to the bilateral relationship. And so far, China has expected this to come because last time, if you remember, 2016, when Trump campaigned, he said he's going to impose 45% tariff against China. And ultimately, he ended up 25%. And this time around, he said he's going to impose 60%. So I think China is prepared for this to come. However, I think Trump is using other excuses from the beginning, like fentanyl. And then later on, he's escalating this to a very absurd level. Now he himself also recognized. So China's position will be very persistent and very resolute, which is that facing this kind of bully, China will not step back and will not give an inch to this kind of behavior and irrespectful attitude. On the second question, I think China believes that so far the Trump administration has been very destructive to global governance, because if you look at Trump, what he did in the first round, he quit Paris Accord, and he's also quitting all kinds of international agreements. And so far, if you look at the tariff, apparently he is giving up the whole set of rules of WTO, and he's going about negotiating bilaterally for a sort of trying to create a new international trading order. And also in terms of peace and war, he suggested he wanted to bring peace to global stage, ending the war in Europe, in the Middle East. However, so far that hasn't been accomplished. On the other side, on topic of climate change, on topic of public health and many other common challenges to human beings, so far the administration have done nothing and actually rolled back any potential support, previous support and potential future support. So this administration is very much on the brink of bringing down the whole global global governance system, and making the world a very chaotic, very dangerous place.
Gupta, there's one detail which really caught a lot of people's attention, which is that on the 100-day mark, the White House actually took time to berate Amazon for wanting to list tariff costs on their price tags alongside the original price of any commodity. The press secretary of the White House called it political and hostile. Why are they so afraid of this particular plan by Amazon? Of course, finally Amazon dropped the idea.
The administration will not say so, but it is watching closely with regard to the public reaction to these tariffs. And the public reaction has been universally negative. It has not yet impacted them significantly. It will impact them down the line. Prices still have not really risen per se, but they are ready and they know what is coming down the line. We saw this in two instances. We saw it with regard to iPhone prices, that they might jump up very significantly, and therefore there was some exclusions built in on with regard to electronic and semiconductor products. And we saw it just today, where another executive order was put out with regard to autos and auto parts, because the realization is that this will really kick up the price of US-made autos made in the United States itself, but with foreign components produced in China. And so they've backtracked on that also in terms of some of the... So they're very attentive to this, and that's why they are nervous about it. And I think that is the primary reason they have talked. Of course, I will say the financial markets have already factored this in. There's a generalized loss of confidence in competent US economic decision making. So, and the administration knows that. And Mr. Besant, who has long experience in the market, is very aware of it and is now trying to play the adult in the Oval Office. So there is nervousness. They won't tell you about it, but it's fairly clear.
Well, let's talk about some of the reactions from general public, not just in America, but also around the world. And most recent CGTN poll, actually two polls conducted in the past few months, first in February when President Trump first came into office, and the second latest one in April, in 38 countries, show that the new US administration is facing a severe global trust crisis. And according to Ipsos, which is a leading global opinion and market research specialist, for the first time in our decade-long survey series, China is placed ahead of the United States when it comes to playing a positive role on international scene. This kind of change happened, according to Ipsos, over the past half year. Einar, what explains this dramatic change in such a short period of time? Does the Trump people and his voters care about this?
Well, on the international side, no. I'd have to say it bluntly. Donald Trump doesn't care. The public doesn't care. They're feeling the pain at home. Despite what my colleagues have said, Trump is not surrendering to international opinion. He's surrendering to his own people, the people he promised he can control prices to, and now he has not. When people are going to the grocery store and they're buying based on I will buy now and pay later. That means they don't have any cash, they don't have any credit, and they're going to pay about somewhere between 300% and 400% interest on top of their already meager situation just to survive.
What about the global picture? I mean, the global trust crisis is from people outside the United States, both in developed countries and in developing countries. This has been unprecedented.
Yeah, this is a gift that shooting oneself in one's foot. I mean, it's incredible to me that Donald Trump would go this far. But it's an opportunity. I don't see this as a negative thing. The U.S. has been acting as a rogue nation by starting wars, disregarding international institutions, undermining the trade system. Let the U.S. go. What would be the best thing in the world would be if the WTO loses the U.S. either because it continues to refuse to pay its dues, as it didn't last year and this year, and just simply goes away. In that way, you could have real reform at the WTO that is talking about a global trade system that all the countries want to be part of, and let the U.S. Regret it later and at some point say that they want to rejoin, but on the basis of a new international order that is multipolar, that respects countries, that we're not in dominance.
Well, I think we're not even just talking only about trade because it's a general feeling, general lack of trust because of what President Trump has said, what the administration has said and did. Dr. Quelch, if this administration doesn't really care so much about what people outside America are thinking. Domestically, it seems it doesn't look that rosy either. Across the board, if you look at polls conducted by more left or right-leaning polls, they're showing pretty much similar results to a varying degree, probably. A poll by Fox News, for instance, shows Americans' overall approval of Trump administration's first 100 days in office is lower than his predecessors, including himself. Why the general dissatisfaction? And if President Trump cares about his voters' approval rating, is he likely to change course or adjust course in the near future?
You're definitely right that the approval rating is down to 41% in one case, 45% in another case. The 41%, I think, is the lowest at the end of 100 days for 70 or more years in the United States. At the same time, as Einar says, domestic supporters of Trump are still with him. 87% of Trump voters say today that he has delivered on his promises. And that's because they are primarily focused on those domestic items that Einar listed at the beginning of the show. You know, so far the inflationary impacts of the tariffs have not bitten. The most recent jobs report was pretty favorable, and so the piper has not yet paid his tune in terms of the consequences of the economic actions of the president. I'd say one other thing that bears also on what Einar said. 50% of Americans have no retirement savings whatsoever. If the stock market goes down 10%, as it has in the first 100 days, it doesn't matter to those people. And many of those people are Trump supporters.
Well, I was listening to NPR this morning. Actually, some people are potentially worried because if the stock market goes down or crashes at a certain point, their retirement definitely will be affected, and that's one of the point of uncertainty. But I do want to talk about China because right now it seems that some pundits are at a dilemma. You know, on the one hand you have China, on the other hand you have Trump. They don't like Trump, but they don't like China either. And the fact that China's standing has gotten a boost, not necessarily because of China's active, words or deeds, but because what America has done to itself. Mr. Zhao, is Trump, by coincidence, making China great?
Well, I think so, to a certain extent, because he's shooting himself in the foot. And you can see that from the very beginning, he's cutting off the USAID, and also now they have a grand plan to further cut staff and foreign aid from the State Department. And I think many pundits have already pointed out that's going to reduce American soft power around the globe. At the same time, increase China's influence in particularly the global south. But that's being said, I think primarily because what China has been doing in recent days that showed that China will stand up against any bully and will abide by international rules, and particularly in support of international multilateral global systems, including the World Trading Organization, including the United Nations and international law. So right now, as Einar pointed out from the very beginning, the United States is wreaking havoc of the international system, and that's how other countries are very concerned about the biggest power in the world, the most powerful nation that now is going rogue, and the consequence will be very dire.
Well, you talk about China's stance, as I mentioned earlier, on the 100th day of President Trump's second term in office. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs released a video titled "Never Kneel Down" in an unusually explicit expression of resolve, and basically says bowing to a bully is like drinking poison to quench thirst. It only deepens the crisis. History has proven compromise won't earn you mercy. Kneeling only invites more bullying. China won't kneel down. China won't back down. And this has definitely gone viral both on international social media platforms and here in China. Einar, how do you look at this message? For us, it goes without saying, but why is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs tweeting this message, tweeting this video at this particular juncture?
Well, it's got to be made clear to the bully that he's not going to be ruling the playground and taking everyone's lunch money. China's the only one actively standing up, although Canada obviously will be joining that. You're going to see more countries doing exactly the same, but they need somebody to step forward and say, look, this isn't the way it's going to go. We're not, especially for China. They remember 100 years of humiliation. That is never going to happen again in China. It's just too fresh. So this is a sign to Trump. You have gone in the wrong direction. It's time to draw back and let's get reasonable. Let's figure out a way you can declare victory and not ruin the world.
Gupta, how do you read this message? Some would even say this is rather undiplomatic, to have such explicit and very direct wording coming from a Ministry of Foreign Affairs of one of the world's biggest countries. What's your take? And do you think the messages will be heeded by those that it's addressed to, and to whom are these messages addressed to?
Yeah, I think what China is trying to do is state its position very, very clearly and get that message across to Mr. Trump. I think we heard the same message at the two sessions also. China is ready to go down whichever rat hole or spider hole Mr. Trump wants to, if that's what it takes to deter him from going in the first place. But he has gone nevertheless because he thought he could gain leverage in the process, and he has not gained that leverage, and that's why there's a certain degree of desperation. I also think it's useful to point out, this issue of surrendering to bullies. I think it's an important one. Let's set China aside for a moment. Just think of Japan. Trump threatened auto tariffs on Japan in 2019. Japan came to the table and signed an agreement on a Japan-US trade agreement across the board, where it gave the United States TPP terms in terms of agricultural market access. Come 2025, once again, auto tariffs are being threatened on Japan. This is essentially the Japanese told to purchase the same horse twice. You surrender once, this is what's going to happen. And therefore, it needs to be very clearly mentioned to him that what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. But that having been said, I get your point also. China needs to be a little careful out here in terms of its diplomatic communication. Once in a while, once in a blue moon, it's useful to put your point across firmly. But at the end of the day, remember, China is the adult in the room. And so China does not have to play on the same terms and in the same way as the US is doing. So make one's position clear, but then be the adult and move on and try to also facilitate and deepen your relations with other players, the EU, Japan, Korea, many other players, Latin American countries, ASEAN. There are a lot of players which China can deepen its trade and investment relations and show who is committed to multilateralism and who is committed to global interdependence.
Yeah, I think the world has their eyes open right from the polls. It's pretty clear. And yet, one thing, some people actually have expressed the worry, according to a Fox News poll that I cited earlier. And I want to ask Mr. Zhao: 2 in 3 Americans, according to Fox News poll, worry a trade war with China could escalate into a military confrontation. And if you look at the video, honestly, you get the sense, of potentially the deployment of all kinds of show of force. Is that fear warranted, Mr. Zhao?
Of course, that's not the point from the Chinese side. We don't want to escalate. We want to resolve this peacefully. However, I think if the Trump administration continue to refuse to back down and continue trying to find ways to escalate and also to verify their original intention by creating new narratives, for instance, to reaching agreement with other countries and then circling China, or like Besson recently mentioned that he has some other instruments in his sleeve that he's trying to pull out and China, for instance, on the financial part or on the technology export part. But at the end of the tunnel, if this escalation continues, there is a potential risk of both sides going into some sort of conflict, not necessarily directly between the United States and China, but it's possible that the U.S. might use certain agents in the region and try to create incidents and trying to use that incidents as a way, as a leverage to further press China. We can't rule that out. However, again, I think I agree with Gupta on that point. China needs to be the adult in the room and trying to find a way to communicate with Trump administration. One more point that I want to mention. Right now, the problem is with the advisors of the Trump administration, because many of those people are ignorant about China and also very self-confident about their approach. So without they themselves, laying the real options for President Trump, it's hard for me to see how Trump can realize that he has been done wrong and how easy he could get out the letter instead of trying to escalate.
And these people won't watch CGTN. They won't listen to people, what we're saying here. We're basically pounding the table and say, listen, China will not call you first. If you keep, humiliating China in public, if you keep saying, look, the Chinese need us more than we do them, if they will call, or if you say, they have already called when we have actually not called, guess if the Chinese will actually call you and say, hey, let's talk. I don't think that's going to happen. So, hey, listen up. Whoever is having President Trump's ear, please do. I don't know who's going to hear me, but we're going to say it anyway for the world's people who are willing to lend us their ear. We have to leave it there, unless any of my guests have any burning comments. Einar, do you think the world is seeing what's happening, even if President Trump and his team is not listening to us?
I think the answer is yes, and it's not just the 4 of us on this show, it's the majority of the world.
As we can see from the polls.
Including penguins.
Okay, a global crisis of trust for the U.S., and that matters. Anyway, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much to my 4 guests, Einar Tangen, Dr. John Quelch, Zhao Hai, and Surabh Gupta, joining us from around the world. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you from Beijing. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and X using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.